Hi, welcome to Talking Books and Stuff, the program that talks all about books and writing and stuff. Here's your host, Dennis Rimmer.
Hello to you and yours, hoping you're having a great time wherever you may be. This is Dennis Rimmer here, the host of Talking Books and Stuff, and we need your help. We're looking for pledges. We're looking for people to be our patrons. We're looking for a little bit of cash here and there, maybe $5 a month or more if you can afford it, but $5 a month would keep us on the air. And we need you, if possible, to go to patreon.com/talkingbooksandstuff1 and pledge your support. I mean, $5 a month, that's what? 1 cup of coffee, maybe 2 cups, a fast food hamburger or 2, things like that, a couple of newspapers, 1 magazine. So if you can spare $5 a month, maybe a bit more, please help us out. That's patreon.com/talkingbooksandstuff1. And of course, the 1 is the number 1, the numeral, not the word spelled out. Okay, that's patreon.com/talkingbooksandstuff1. If you can pledge your support to help us keep our podcasts coming. We have lots of great guests lined up, lots more to come. So please stay with us. Thank you. And as Diane says, may all the good news be yours. Hello again, it's Talking Books and Writing and Stuff. Today talking with Rob Vanstone, based in Regina, talking about writing and books and stuff, which means football, which means the CFL. Rob is based in Regina. And Rob Vanstone, you have a new book out, 100 Things Roughrider Fans Should Know and Do Before They Die. And I understand from what I've seen earlier, this concept came from outside the Canada, came from the good old US of A. Maybe you can explain for us how that all came about. That's a bit of a change.
Well, yeah, the publisher Triumph Books of Chicago, they've done this version, this type of book with so many professional sports teams, whether it's NHL, NFL, NBA, baseball. If you look around Canada, I think there's one for every NHL team. There's a Blue Jays book, etc. So it's been a pretty successful formula for them. So they came to me in the spring of 2018 and asked me they said they'd like to kind of stick their toe in the water with regard to the Canadian Football League and asked me if I'd like to do the Roughrider version. They figured the Roughriders were the logical team with which to start. I thought about it intensely for about 3 minutes and then said, yeah, absolutely. And so there we go. And now the book it seems like a blur, but it's done. And the response seems to have been pretty good. So that's always nice to see.
Now, is it released like only in Saskatchewan, or I guess because Roughrider fans are everywhere, unfortunately, it should be across Canada, right?
Yeah, it seems to be. Actually, the first person to contact me and say that he had a copy of it was someone from Vancouver. He said he found it at Indigo in Vancouver, and this was before it was even on the shelves in Saskatchewan. And my wife and I are going to Toronto to visit her family over just after Christmas. And we were kind of curious, like, whereabouts is this book if we were to go to an Indigo chapters, what have you, in Toronto. So we ended up looking to see how many copies there were at certain bookstores in Toronto. So I'm probably going to go and walk around and strategically place the book at a prominent place at various Indigos in Toronto.
You do that too.
It might get better placement than they envision.
I do that too with my book, The Great Canadian Notebook. I'll send you a copy, walk around the stores, and if it's not where I think it should be, it kind of gets moved a bit. So.
Oh, yeah, I reserve the right to do that.
Exactly. So. Rob Vanstone is with us. The book we're discussing in the main is 100 Things Roughrider Fans Should Know and Do Before They Die. But, Rob, what's your story? You grew up in Regina, I assume. How'd you get it from growing up in Regina into the newspaper business? Because you do work for a newspaper.
Yes, I do. It's a pretty boring life story. Hopefully I won't put your listeners to sleep with it. I grew up born here in 1964 and just raised here, and I grew up loving sports. My mom was, I think, the catalyst to loving sports, because she took me to Rider games as far back as I can remember, and even before I was born. A very pregnant mother was going to Rider games with me, and so Mom really pushed the sports aspect. Not because she didn't really push it, but she liked it, and she introduced me to it. My dad was always a proponent of reading, so between loving sports and being introduced to the love of reading through my father, it just became a natural to want to do this. And I grew up reading the newspaper so ardently, and as far back as I can remember, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a sports writer, and not only that, I wanted to be a sports writer in Regina. To me, the Leader Post was and always will be the New York Times. So, with all due respect to the New York Times, I think this is a big one.
Right. Well,
I've loved my time here, and that's my life story. I went to University of Regina Journalism School, got a summer job at the Leader Post in '86. Got another summer job at the Leader Post after I graduated in '87, and that summer job is basically still in effect because I haven't left.
You haven't left, so you're just hanging on day to day.
Yeah. I mean, it was just a challenging time for newspapers everywhere. I love it as much as I ever have, and the people here just are so amazing. I think in a way I enjoy it more now than ever, because when you start out, you think, I remember going to pension meetings when I was like 23 years old. It's like, who cares, right?
Yeah,
and that day is never going to come. But as you get older, I'm 56 in March, and you realize that not only your days professionally, but maybe on this planet aren't. You've had more of them than are ahead of you. So I find myself cherishing it and enjoying it probably as much as ever. And my mother just passed away a couple of weeks ago, and then the people that I work with have been so absolutely phenomenal. I'm so grateful for them. I just love them. Yes,
and I again express our condolences, because actually we went through the same thing earlier in October. And on a lighter note, you ran a column a couple weeks back about the passing of your mother, and to my chagrin, and I'm trying to be a bit funny here, I know in a serious situation, but the picture in the paper here that came with the article was of Ronnie Lancaster once again beating the BC Lions. And I went, Rob,
Labor Day 1976.
Yeah, I went, no, like, I know I'm going to interview you, and I saw this, and I went, how am I going to make a joke out of this one? Because you said you were born in '64. Well, I just moved from the coast to Saskatoon in 1964, just in time for the Lions to win their very first Grey Cup.
Oh, timing.
Oh, and it was like, my next question, of course, is who has more Grey Cups, the Lions or the Riders?
Well, the Riders have their very modest total of 4, and it's amazing when you look at it, Des. I mean, the Edmonton Eskimos won more Grey Cups in succession starting in 1978 than the Roughriders have won overall.
Right.
It's staggering. There's a little bit in the book, kind of a sidebar on. I've told this story many times, but Mark Cosmo is a former linebacker in the CFL. He won Grey Cups with Montreal in 1970, Hamilton in 1972, and Ottawa in 73 and 76. And he wore the same pair of cleats in all 4 games. So if you look at it, Mark Cosmos' cleats have been a part of as many Grey Cup victories as the Saskatchewan Roughriders have since 1910.
So I take it, yeah, that anecdote is in the book, 100 Things Roughrider Fans. Yep.
It's a footnote in history.
As it were. And these days he would get a $1 million contract for wearing those things.
Oh, you would think there's got to be some endorsers out there. I'm not sure if back then he was just really that attached to the cleats, or whether the teams were just so frugal that they couldn't afford to buy him a new pair. Probably the latter, knowing the state of the CFL back then.
Right, probably. Back to your childhood, reading and sports. So did you have a favorite book as a kid?
Oh, I always liked Curious George and Baybar. I think it was an elephant. Was Baybar the elephant?
I think so, but...
And so I always used to go to the library and get those. And then I became a hockey fan really quickly. So I used to go to the public library in Regina, and any hockey book I could find, I just ate it up. And there used to be a book about a football player named 5 Yard Fuller. Ever heard of 5 Yard Fuller?
No, but I've heard of Chip Hilton. That was my next question, did you ever read Chip Hilton books?
I didn't.
Oh, but I never read any 5 Yard Fuller books, so tell me about that.
And he was just this amazing football player. I remember our teacher reading the book to us in grade 2, Mrs. Green's class, and I always thought 5 Yard Fuller was so cool. So I went to the Massey School Library to see if there were any other football books, and there was a series of books called the Bronk Burnett stories, or the Bronk Burnett series, and it was this football player named Bronk Burnett, and I remember, I think there were about 3 or 4 of them that I just absolutely ate up, and some of the names were kind of based on names of actual pro football players. I think there was a player in there, and I'm probably getting these mixed up, but there was a player in the book, a running back named or a receiver, or something named Vitamin Smith, and at the time the Los Angeles Rams had a receiver named Vitamin Stone. And I can't remember which one was Smith and which one was Stone, and there was a running back or a player named Bob Autumn, which was also the name of a writer at Sports Illustrated at the time. So they loosely borrowed some names for the purposes of the Bronk Burnett series, and I remember reading those in the Massey School Library, and just anything I could get my hands on to read, I could not devour anything fast enough. It was just insatiable.
I know.
That's a lot. That's due mainly to my dad.
Gotcha. Hockey, did you ever read Scrubs on Skates? I'm sure you did.
I didn't actually.
What?
I've never been aside from the Bronk Burnett series and 5 Yard Fuller, I've never really been a fiction guy.
Okay.
So I've never read Scrubs on Skates, which is and I've never read the Hockey Sweater, which is kind of shameful coming from Canada. I've always been a nonfiction person, so you name a hockey book that came out in the late 60s or early to mid 70s that I guess wasn't nonfiction, and I probably read it. And there's a lot more hockey books in Canada than there are football books, and I think the football library in general is not as extensive as it should be for some reason. There's so much hockey. You go into a bookstore in Canada, there's so much hockey, and baseball just seems to lend itself to brilliant writing. But I've always thought that there was kind of the football reader market wasn't as served as well as it should be, just in terms of volume. So I'm glad to have put 3 books out there, at least for the football readers anyway.
Exactly. We're with Rob Vanstone, 100 Things Roughrider Fans Should Know and Do Before They Die. And I saw an interview with Kevin Mitchell that you did, and you said you had a hard time cutting it down to 100 as opposed to finding 100.
Oh yeah, that was totally the challenge. If they told me they wanted 200 or 300 things, I could have come up with them. I mean, you're given a blank canvas. You look at a team that's inception was 1910, so you've got more than a century worth of material, and I've been watching the team for egads more than half of its existence now, and so or close to it. So the amount of stories is really, the possibilities are infinite. It was a matter. I sat down once they approached me, the night I agreed to it, and just off the top of my head, I think I had a list of about 150. And then from there I whittled it down, and then other things come to mind as you go. But that was just the initial off the top of the head list. And the publisher said you could do 100 chapters, obviously, and they usually have 10 to 20 little sidebars. So I said, okay, I'll do 20. So it's actually 120 things. One of them is the Mark Cosmos cleats tidbit.
100 things.
So I cheated a little with 100 things. It's actually 120.
And should know and do. So what should Roughrider fans do before they pass on?
I think the really cool thing, and this is still a bucket list thing for me, is seeing them play somewhere other than Regina, and just see them play at all the ballparks. Not only seeing the team there, but I think being part of that contingent of Rider fans that travels so well, or that contingent of Rider fans who lives elsewhere and just shows up en masse when the team is on the road. For example, Calgary. I've seen the Riders play in Calgary many times, even before I started doing this for a living. But back in the 70s, and early 80s when I went to road games in Calgary, there weren't as many Rider fans in the stands then as there are now. And I always thought it would be so cool now to sit at a game at McMahon Stadium in the stands and really get a feel for how immense that the Rider cheering section is. And when the Riders score a touchdown, the response really isn't that different in terms of decibel level from when Calgary scores a touchdown. So it would be really cool to immerse myself in that. And I'd love to see some of the stadiums that I have not yet seen. I haven't seen a game at the new stadium in Hamilton. I think that would be cool. I've never seen the Riders play in Montreal. I think that would be outstanding. I haven't seen them play a regular season game in BC. That would be cool. And I haven't been to the new stadium in Winnipeg yet either. So there's a few to cross off the list that I'd really like to. I just think that's really the coolest thing. And just the camaraderie between the fans of different allegiances is something that's just such a great part of Canadiana and a great part of Canadian football. There really isn't the enmity that you would find in other places. I've been to Yankee Stadium and watched Boston Red Sox fans show up and get beer thrown on them, and you hear horror stories about what it was like once upon a time for fans to go into Oakland and see a game if they're not cheering for the Raiders, and as they once were. And so there's never really that kind of hostility when you're a Rider fan going into another stadium, or whether you're a visiting fan coming to Saskatchewan. It's pretty convivial, at least until the game starts.
Until the game's right. Speaking of Boston and the Yankees, it's what do they say in Boston? That blankety blank Bucky Dent.
I remember it well.
I remember. Well, speaking of
Mike Torres was pitching.
Okay, I didn't know that. I was visiting in England at the time and read it in the Paris version of what do they call it? The Herald.
International Herald Tribune?
Yes, the International Herald Tribune. So I didn't even know about it.
I was in grade 9. I was in grade 9. Actually, in Mr. Kennischuk's grade 9 chemistry class in Campbell Collegiate in Regina when Bucky Dent hit the home run. We didn't get the game on TV. We just got cable television in Regina back then, but we didn't get. I believe that was an ABC game, and we only got CBS and NBC back then, so I never saw the Bucky Dent home run live. I probably, had I had the opportunity, I probably wouldn't have been in Mr. Kennischuk's grade 9 chemistry class that afternoon.
Well, it's like the CFL for a lot of us has been part of our blood since growing up. I mean, I remember, because I'm a tad older than you, reading headlines in the Vancouver Sun that the quote was, "Crow must go," because Clem Crow was a coach actually after Annis Stukas, and I used to work with Annis Stukas at CFUN in Vancouver, but Crow must go, and I guess that was 58 or so. And then they got into the playoffs, my BC Lions in 59, and then the Grey Cups in 63, that darn Angela Mosca, and 64 when they won it. So back to the Roughriders, like in sports football terms, in quotes, air quotes, I just hate Ronnie Lancaster and George Reed, because it didn't matter what was happening. The Riders could have had a 0-14 season and they'd win 2 games, and both of them would be against the BC Lions. Like, I just hate those guys. They were so damn good.
They were so good, and it's like they beat. I remember they lost to BC in '65, and then didn't lose again to the BC until '75. So as I was growing up, it was just. It's at Taylor Field. Let me add the qualifier at Taylor Field. So as I was growing up, going to Rider games, you just the free space on the bingo card was the Riders playing BC and winning at home. There's just no doubt that they would beat BC. And but the pendulum did swing. There was, of course, the Western Final, the Paul McCallum game of 2004, and there have been a few. The Lions beat them again in the West Final in 2006. So the BC, as time went on, ended up having its share of good fortune against the Riders. The Riders missed the playoffs for 11 consecutive years, finally make the playoffs in 1988, and BC comes here and absolutely throttles them. So it wasn't always that one-sided, but I just remember the BC game just being perceived as a given.
Yeah.
And even when Eagle Keys went there, it just never really changed for the longest time.
I know. It was crazy, but like I said, I grew up with the BC Lions. Why are the Roughriders? Does anybody have an answer to that age-old question? Why are the Roughriders, Rob Vanstone, why are they so popular?
I think at least around here, there's a professional lacrosse team and there's a professional basketball team, both based in Saskatoon. But by and large, for the longest time, this is the one thing that people have had sporting wise in the province that you can rally around. And so I think it's a real point of pride with people. And there's so many Saskatchewan expatriates living across the country that you've got this built-in fan base no matter where the team goes. And I think the fact that it's community owned, I think I think some of the reasons that compel people to cheer for the Green Bay Packers are probably some of the same ones that endear people to the Roughriders. And it hasn't always been the easiest run for them. There's been various times in the team's history when its future has been imperiled, and there's been times in its history where it was the free space on the bingo card in the CFL, and I think there's just been a bit of empathy for this franchise as well, because they've had some heartbreaking losses, some of the most heartbreaking in CFL history, and there's been some adversity that you can't even imagine. For example, four players dying in a plane crash in 1956, and the Riders weren't the only team affected by that. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers lost Calvin Jones, a running back, for example. But just so many things have happened that could have basically destroyed this franchise, and the economic pressures that it's faced, I think, could have destroyed it. And just illogically, there shouldn't be a team in Saskatchewan. When you look at the size of the other markets and the size of Regina compared to other cities in which CFL teams are based, it really, in some ways it's miraculous that it still exists, and I think people celebrate it a little bit extra because they know it hasn't always been the easiest road.
And Rob Vanstone is with us. 100 Things Roughrider Fans Should Know and Do Before They Die. What are your other two books? They're both about Roughriders.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of variety to my library. I wrote a book on the 1966 Roughriders and the evolution of that team and what became of all those players. So there's a bit of BC Lions or Vancouver content for you, because so much of that is centered around what happened November 26, 1966 at Empire Stadium. And so I just told the story of that team, dating back to 1951 actually, and right through 2008, just exploring basically the players on that team and some of their stories. And then I did a book on the 1989 Roughriders called The Greatest Grey Cup Ever, and same sort of format. And that starts with a Tony Gabriel catch in the 76 Grey Cup and goes right through to Dave Ridgway's game-winning field goal in 1989. And the first Rider book was called West Riders Best, which was a headline on the front page of the Leader Post when the Riders beat Ottawa 29-14 in 1966. So two Grey Cup books, and now this one, a different project entirely.
What about the CFL makes it different and special, and how can it improve itself? I have a couple of suggestions, but they're never going to listen to me. But what do you think? There's just always some nagging doubts about the CFL, and I don't know why.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of a sometimes I think there's a bit of an inferiority complex around Canadians, and I'm not sure we always celebrate our own as much as we should.
Exactly.
You hear it even in regards to entertainment artists. How many times have you heard that Jan Arden hasn't, except for one song, Jan Arden hasn't made this consistent breakthrough in the States, and even people would say that about the Tragically Hip. Who cares? Celebrate them. They're absolutely wonderful. And Oscar Peterson, the great jazz pianist, used to say he almost had to make it in the States before he was accepted in his home country. And
Oh, yeah.
Oscar Peterson was brilliant in the 1940s before he'd ever played a note in the United States. And it was as proud a Canadian as there could be. But there seems to be that notion out there you need validation from the States in order for you to really be celebrated in Canada. And it bothers me because I think it's affected the Canadian Football League a little bit. Some people will perceive it as minor league, and they'll say it's NFL rejects and whatever. And it's not necessarily the players, it's the style of play.
It's different game. It's a different game.
Totally different game. And I wish more people would just enjoy it for what it is. And I wish people would, some people say, oh, I like the NFL, I don't like the CFL. And some people say, I like the CFL, I don't like the NFL. Just enjoy football. It's all wonderful. Have a great time with it. And I just, I don't know. It bothers me sometimes when people are dismissive of the Canadian Football League because it's just something I've grown up loving and always will love, until as long as I've got some keystrokes left in my fingers.
Exactly.
And some breath left in my lungs. As far as what could be better, I think there's always going to be crises. As long as I've followed this league, there's been some areas where you think things can improve. When I started following it, the Montreal and you look at the crowds that Toronto used to get. They used to pack 50,000 people in an exhibition stadium, but
right.
For decades now, Toronto has been that perennial concern, and you're never really sure what's going on in Vancouver. There's been so much talk about the ownership situation. The league has been really fortunate to have benevolent owners. I mean, what kind of shape would the Hamilton Tiger Cats have been in if Bob Young hadn't taken over? And if you look back, what if David Braley hadn't bought the Hamilton Tiger Cats after Harold Ballard basically wanted nothing more to do with them? Right. There's always going to be trouble spots. There's always going to be brush fires. I'm not sure there'll ever be a solution for the Toronto situation. I think you're just going to need to find an owner who's willing to absorb some losses. But I think right now it's probably about as prosperous overall as the league has been. To have that contract with TSN that pretty much handles most of the player payroll every year, that gives the CFL a form of security that it never dreamed of once upon a time. TSN really needs a lot of credit, deserves a lot of credit for what it's been able to do to help the CFL stay, not only remain alive, but be about as prosperous as we've seen it be.
We're talking with Rob Vanstone, his latest book, 100 Things Roughrider Fans Should Know and Do Before They Die. Right now we're talking about the CFL, what makes it so special. I have some suggestions about how to make it better. Real quickly, first of all was an expansion to Halifax, so we got that. Move Toronto to Quebec City. Move Vancouver-based Lions to Kelowna. Get rid of the no yards penalty and loosen up the pass interference calls. How about that?
That's quite the list. You would run into trouble if you were to move the CFL out of Toronto, simply because I think a lot of the marketing deals are based on, or the advertising deals are based on there being a team in Toronto. They would have to, the economics of the league would change were that team to move. Quebec City to me though that makes a lot of sense when you consider the proliferation of interest in football in Quebec City. I'm surprised that doesn't get talked about more often when you're talking about expansion. There's always a talk about the Maritimes, but Quebec has always seemed to me to be a pretty fertile ground for football in Canada. And then what if you were to have the Alouettes and Quebec City facing off?
Well, it'd be like the Nordiques and the Canadians, yeah.
Oh, would that be amazing? Yeah. I'm not sure how Quebec City got lost in that conversation, but it just doesn't seem to come up very often anymore. If you were to get rid of the no yards, then you'd have the fair catch, and that's not really that exciting either. I don't like either one.
But it could be if the return player fumbles the ball. And then you go crazy, because I've seen it happen in watching NFL games or college U.S. university sports. The guy calls for a fair catch. If he fumbles the ball, then it's fair game, right? Or am I missing the point?
No, that's pretty much it. But there's really no perfect way. There's been people advocating getting rid of the rouge, but then no. Don't get rid of the rouge.
Well, people don't understand that it's not rewarding for failure. It's punishing for failure to get the ball out of the end zone.
Yeah,
I mean, the ball is still live. It goes into the end zone. The receiver catches it. He tries to return it. Oh, he's tackled, basically. Yep, single point for the other guys because you failed on your job. You had one job, get the ball out of the end zone. You didn't do it. So.
I don't like it when somebody can just punt the ball or have a place kick that just goes right out the back of the end zone and you get automatic points.
That should be changed. But if it's a live ball,
objections to that.
If it's a live ball, in my opinion. So anyway, enough of us. And the no yards, I think, isn't that a hold back to when there was no blocking on punt returns?
I'm not sure of its origin. I would think so, but what the no yards rule does though is it guarantees that the kick is going to be returned. Somebody's got to make a play on the ball. I can't. It still boggles the mind that the league had that no blocking rule. A league that's so predicated on entertainment and such a exciting style of play, and yet there was no blocking. Yet Gino Wolosyuk in 1962, this is also in the book, returned a punt for a touchdown at Empire Stadium.
Of course he did.
This not overly fast, squat little defensive back returned a punt 60-some yards for a touchdown in 1962. I think it was the only touchdown the Riders got that day because BC did win quite handily. Like, how did one player return a punt for a touchdown against 12? Jim Silje did it for Calgary in the 1970 West Final. How does one player elude everybody?
Right.
It's just amazing to think that ever happened.
Do you have a favorite CFL personality, past, present, that you've talked with?
Well, my favorite athlete of all time is a former Rider receiver named Joey Walters. And I just loved watching him play. He was just such a spectacular player. And I had a chance to meet him back in the early 80s, and just a wonderful guy. And I've gotten to know him pretty well over the last 10, 15 years. And he's become a really dear friend. So Joey Walters will always be it for me. He was always my favorite player. The Riders didn't have great teams when he played, but just the exciting catches that he made, and just the thrills that he provided, and the way he treated people. Joey's always going to be number one for me. But growing up here, I know you referenced them earlier, but you grew up in Saskatchewan in the late 60s or into the 70s, and it's Ron Lancaster and George Reed. And you can't mention one without the other. And so just growing up, those were always the football cards that you wanted to get when you were trading cards on the playground at school. And I just grew up idolizing both of them for reasons that probably don't require any elaboration. And but Joey Walters will always stand out for me just because of what a tremendous player he was and what a tremendous person he is.
Well, I have two Roughrider connections, as much as I hate to admit it. One is I lost a bet at work a couple years ago, and so I wore a Roughrider hat to work, and it's still in my closet. It was a Lions against the Roughriders, and I moved here in 1964 for grade 10. I played junior football at Bedford Road in Saskatoon, and my football cleats were from Dale West.
No way.
His mother worked with my dad, and so they were like 19 sizes too big for me, but that's what I had.
Did the cleats move as fast with your feet in them as they did with Dale's feet in them?
I think I went backwards. But I was 5'9", same height as I am now, 139 pounds, and I was the center.
Oh my goodness!
I know. I only played the one season, but what the
That's
hell?
Amazing.
Yeah, and I don't know what happened to the cleats. I don't have them anymore, but that was a story. I was told that they used to belong to Dale West. So
he's an amazing athlete. I mean, in addition to being a great football player, I think he was an accomplished speed skater. He was an accomplished track athlete. He still holds the 100-yard dash record for Saskatchewan high schools, and always will, because once they went to 100-meter dash, they retired the 100-yard dash record. And Dale West, I think, ran a 9.8 second 100-yard dash in 1958, something like that, 57.
Some of those guys from the old days, that were triple threats, like Jackie Parker comes to mind, Garnet Henley comes to mind.
Oh,
guys like that. So that's amazing.
Garnet Henley, I don't think he gets enough due. When you look at what he did for the amount of time that he did it, and excelling as a receiver and excelling as a defensive back, and then moving to receiver primarily for the 72 season when he was 36 years old and being named the most outstanding player in the league. What a stunningly amazing athlete Garnie Henley was.
Yeah, and I think I heard a comment once, we're still talking about the CFL with Rob Vanstone. We'll wrap it up in a couple of seconds here, but somebody said they thought the CFL was a superior game played by inferior athletes, and I disagree with that, because look at what you have to do just to run the width of the field or the length of the field in the CFL as opposed to anything else.
Once upon a time, it used to take a different sort of athlete to play this game. The smaller player, I think, is more in vogue now in the NFL than used to be the case. There's more situational players than there used to be, but so many times you'd get the undersized receiver or the undersized running back or the undersized defensive back or even a defensive lineman coming to Canada because there really wasn't a place for them in the NFL, or and a quarterback who could run. Everybody wanted their 6'3", 6'4" statue in the pocket,
right?
And so the shorter quarterback. Look at Doug Flutie being the classic example, and there's so many other smaller quarterbacks who never got a shot down there. Now you look at the NFL, and Kyler Murray was the first overall draft pick, and he's about Ronnie's height. So it's a different game now. They're more accepting in the United States or in American pro football of the smaller athlete. Whereas once upon a time, there was these tremendous athletes, as athletic and as skilled as anybody playing in the NFL, but they weren't 6'2", they weren't 210 pounds, and the size of this field and the nature of the game worked to their advantage so well. Now you're seeing the NFL, I think. They're looking at a lot of the same players that the CFL used to, and or CFL will. So I'm not sure the CFL gets first crack at the smaller players. You look at black quarterbacks and how once upon a time they wouldn't get a look in the National Football League, and the Canadian Football League was so far ahead of the game. When you look at Chuck Ely with the 1972 Hamilton Tiger Cats, even going back to Carroll Williams with the Montreal Alouettes, of course, Warren Moon, and the opportunities that were provided players who just wouldn't get a look based upon prejudice in the NFL. Ed McQuarters should have played in the NFL for the entirety of his pro football career. He was that good, but there were other factors at play.
Yeah, well, back in 50s, 60s, even in early 70s, I guess there was probably, I've been told, the pay was pretty much the same. So
it was, and the American dollar wasn't as strong as the Canadian dollar.
Yeah, so you got lots of guys who came up and played that were just as good, and they, well, what the heck, I'm going to play in Vancouver instead of New York Giants because they're going to pay me the same amount, basically. And I talked to Jim Young once. I hate to always talk about myself, but he played, I think, for Green Bay Packers once or twice, or I think he had a couple of seasons in the NFL. I asked him the difference in players. Minnesota. And difference in players or anything. He said, no, when you get hit, you get hit. You get hit hard up here or down there. It doesn't matter. You get hit, and you get hit hard. He said it was like hanging yourself from a rope in your garage and having somebody hit you in the chest with a baseball bat.
Well, you mentioned earlier, books that I read when I was growing up, and one of the first football books I ever read was Dirty 30 by Jim Young with Jim Taylor.
Jim Taylor, and, what a great guy. I love Jim Taylor.
What a great man.
I met him. Here I go again. But yeah, he was so nice to talk to. And
wasn't he?
The stuff that came out of his fingers is like, I've always wanted to be in newspapers myself, but never did. But he was just a magnificent writer and a great guy. So, but you're an even better guy because you're right here, right now. We're with Rob Vanstone, 100 Things Roughrider Fans Should Know and Do Before They Die. And before we hang up, Rob, predictions for the upcoming CFL season.
Oh, goodness. I hadn't even pondered it that carefully. It's so tough to make that call. I'm not trying to vacillate, but with so many free agents, you don't know who's going to have who. But I really think the Roughriders have an excellent foundation here because they've got a young quarterback in Cody Fajardo, and I think he's going to be a magnet that's going to allow them to sign a number of free agents. And with the Grey Cup being in Regina in November, I think the Riders this could be one of those years that people talk about for a long time. Maybe there's even another book in it or some revisions to the one that I just wrote. I really think as long as Cody Fajardo is here, the Riders have got something and someone very special. As far as the East, Hamilton just looks like they're going to be good for a number of years there. They've just got they seem to have the right system. I think Orlando Steinauer is just going to keep getting better and better as a coach. They had the disappointment in the Grey Cup, but when they I don't see anybody challenging Hamilton for a number of years.
Well, I like Hamilton. I always have, except when they beat the Lions in the Grey Cup. But I lived in Bellingham, Washington for almost 20 years, and Orlando played for Western Washington Vikings in Bellingham. So there's one for you. There's one for you.
There's some trivia.
There's trivia that no one ever cares about. Rob Vanstone, 100 Things Roughrider fans should know and do before they die. It's out there right now. Go get it with your holiday money or gift certificates or something. And Rob, thank you very much for your time today.
Oh, thanks for your time, Dennis. It's been fun reliving some of these memories. I'd forgotten about the Bronk Burnett series, but now I'm going to have to go and see if they still got them in the Regina Public Library. Maybe the same versions I checked out in 1973 are still there.
Could be. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dennis. Take care.
Thank you for visiting with us today. This is Talking Books and Stuff with Dennis Rimmer. Contact him at dennis@talkingbooks.tk. Thank you, and may all the good news be yours. Oh, and don't forget to check out his book, The Great Canadian Notebook, available across Canada and at amazon.ca.